wanted to just open with a brief mention about Marion Lewis. One of our, actually, she's about the only Pathwork helper that generally shows up at these, as our Pathwork evenings. Marion broke her hip. She was hit by a cyclist in New York. And she fractured one of her legs pretty badly. Briefly put on a ventilator, but she's making a very good recovery right now. She's at NYU Presbyterian. And I've been sending you guys updates from her family. So I want to just send some love and energy to Marion maybe later on today. Because, you know, she's very close to my heart and I've known her forever. I still remember her working in Pathwork groups with Eva way back. And she's a dynamic lady, and you all, you know, have been listening to her as we've had our Pathwork evenings. By the way, Tracy said, announced that our next meeting will be in person and virtual for people in Albuquerque, because you can still tune in. But those of us in New York, we're going to actually meet. I've gotten both vaccine shots, and so did Tracy, and so we're going to all meet in person, which I think will be really great.
I want to say, Alan, I didn't get the vaccine. I've chosen at this time not to do it.
Okay.
I'll do it eventually, but not right now. And I'm not going into Manhattan. So will it be possible for me to do it online?
Yeah, I think we're going to have an iPhone set up and we can do both. All right. Hey, Tracy, that's correct, right?
Yes, we'll set up the Zoom link as well. So some people will be in the living room and the other people will be on Zoom.
All right. Well, my friends, did everybody read the lecture? Yay. This is a short lecture, but this lecture is about independence. You know, I saw Biden's press conference the other day, and he talked about that in July 4th, we're all going to be able to celebrate independence from the virus. But this lecture is about strengthening the independent self-identification. And it briefly talks about how we often identify first with our parents, then with other people, and then with causes, religions, and political movements. But all of that is a distraction from identifying with ourselves. And then the lecture also is bracketed by discussions of time. It begins with a discussion of time and ends with a discussion of time. And let me just recap some of the main points of the lecture, and then we'll have a discussion about it. First thing the guide says, which he says in many lectures, is the great significance of the difference between emotional and intellectual understanding, which is profound and very evident, I think, to almost everyone. You know, I mean, I think that, you know, speaking for myself, we get stuck up in our moods, right? Our moods seem overwhelming, even though intellectually we don't have to. Intellectually, we can go galloping ahead of our moods. Somehow, our moods are more seem to have a greater power than the intellect. I mean, it's very common that people try to think their way out of something and they can't do it, because you have to feel into what you're feeling in order to ground the intellectual conceptions you have, say from the lectures, in your emotional life. And of course, later on in the lecture, the guide says something else, which is very typically said in the Pathwork, which is, you know, it never hurts to know more about what's going on inside yourself. It's never a bad idea to learn more. So it's the opposite of what you don't know can't hurt you. The more you know, the less you can be hurt. So bearing in mind the fact that our emotions tend to lag way behind our intellectual ideas, our intellectual conception of who we are and what's going on, then I think we have to, then let's look at this other issue, the question of time. The guide talks about, of course, living in the past and living in the future, and that it's really not possible to live in either one. because trying to live in the past or the future is really embracing a fantasy. And why do we try to live in the past or the future? Well, it's because, quote, you seek an easy way out rather than tackling whatever prevents you from living as fully as you are meant to. So that is, of course, the struggle that we all have, right? To embrace the now and to live more fully. He says, and this I thought was quite interesting, he says, to live in the now, you have to have a keen sense of your own reality. I personally feel that one's idea of one's own reality is often sort of elusive, right? You know, you often wonder, are you really in reality or not? You know, how do people see you? Are you really understanding where you are? Are you really understanding the world properly? Are you perceiving things correctly? So this whole idea that you have to have a keen sense of your own reality, that's a very important concept. And it reminds me of what the guide says about finding one's faults, you know, in one of the early lectures, that it's a good idea to talk to somebody who's close to you, who knows you well, and to say, what are my faults? Please be objective. Tell me what you think. And that's a way of seeing yourself more in reality, I think. Often one tries to gloss over um, what our personal realities are, like the way people don't like photographs of themselves. Anyway, um, so when one doesn't live in reality, then, as the guide says, this hidden distortion destroys so many possibilities for fully living, for happiness and meaning. And then the guide also says, quote, a realistic sense of one's own mortality is never a burden. It is never depressing or fear producing. So I think about that a lot when I'm with my mom, you know, holding her hand, and she's 99 and a half. And I say, well, what does it mean to have a sense of one's own mortality? I can't say that my mom is afraid of dying. I don't think she is afraid. Now, the question of, I think we should talk about this, like, what does it mean to have a sense of one's own mortality? And quote, it is never depressing or fear producing. That is something to think about. All right, then the main section of the lecture, which I'm going to summarize, is the central focus, which is this whole thing about identification with the self and with others. So who do you identify with? And how does that prevent you or hinder you from identifying with yourself? The guy talks about how we're interested in making an impression on others, how we often see ourselves, we're more interested in how the impression we make on others than the way that we really are. We don't really want to see our own reality. It kind of reminds me of our governor, Andrew Cuomo, you know, who has been accused by so many ladies of coming on to them. And it's like, wait a second, I didn't make any untoward comments, and I don't know what these guys are talking about. They're making allegations that I was flirtatious with them. So it's like, okay, um, to what degree does he not understand his reality? Is he identifying with how they are seeing him, or is he identifying with his own reality? It's like, when your reality is very divorced from the way other people see you, I think you have to think about that a little bit, right? He's saying, no, that's not my reality. I'm not doing that. Okay. Sorry for the digression. Now, the guide talks about how the child matures, and as the child matures, he or she cuts the umbilical cord and becomes stronger within his or her own self. However, the guide says, but a soul that is burdened with unresolved problems will not desire to cut the parental bond, but will instead maintain it in unhealthy ways. So, you know, this also comes into what we bring into this life. We bring various distortions and hindrances in that from previous incarnations into this life. So if we're not healthy, we do not want to cut the parental bond. We want to become the parent with whom, which we, as the guide says, with whom we favorably identify. And later we try to be that parent rather than try to find our own reality, who we really are. The guide says, quote, for the child, positive identification is desirable. For an adult, a positive identification is often as undesirable as a negative one because both prevent the evolution of the self. So there's a point in which a child identifies with another parent, with a parent positively, but you can't do that when you're an adult. If you try to identify with your parent and you're an adult, it doesn't work because that prevents the evolution of the self. And then the guide says, interestingly enough, that you substitute others for your parents. This extends into national, religious, and political groups. So the desire to conform, to become a part of other political groups, or perhaps to submerge your identity in political groups or religious groups, that's another way of being alienated from yourself. And he says, interestingly enough, good phrase, right? Do we need to obtain our lifeblood from others? You don't need to live in that state of dependency. You can cut off the emotional and spiritual umbilical cord. So, the guide is really sounding like Thoreau, self-reliance. Emerson, he's really sort of in this lecture giving us a injunction to be self-reliant. And then finally, the guide goes back to the theme of time. And the guide talks about, which is the theme of unity versus duality that is echoed in so many lectures, that, you've got to roll with the curve, the positive and the negative. You've got to experience the good times and the bad times. And interestingly enough, he says you have to experience the bad times, the downward curve, not as depressing, upsetting, or disadvantageous. So that is the key to an awareness of unity that transcends duality. In other words, even during the bad times, there's something wonderful and positive that you experience even in the bad times. And I'm thinking about that with my mom. Obviously, it's bad for her to be bedbound, to have a bed sore, to have trouble walking. And I'm kind of feeling into my love and care for her and being there for her. So, when you kind of feel into things, the distinction between good times and bad times sort of goes away in an interesting way, in my experience. Anyway, my friends, that's my summary of the lecture. So let's open it up to our discussion, and let me ask folks what they were thinking and what they were feeling about this lecture. And I can always ask Tracy why she liked this one, why she wanted to pick it. Tracy?
Well, I think it jumped out at me because one of the very early lectures that the guide gave us was the importance of self-reliability, to be reliant on oneself, and that it was an absolute prerequisite for enlightenment, that we had to be able to stand in every which way on our own 2 feet, emotionally, financially, physically, mentally, and that this lecture then drilled down into the various ways that we can escape that through identification with things other than ourselves. And I was fascinated by thinking about the difference between, so for example, one of the things I think the guy said was that you could be identified with the team, I'm a Yankees fan, and there's a line where there's nothing wrong with liking a team. If you like the Yankees, you like them, that's a normal part of life. But when you become so identified with that team that it becomes almost part of you, then that shifts the center of gravity away from yourself to, a team. You could do it with a political party. We've seen that, with Republicans and Democrats quite quite drastically in the last couple of years. So I was just thinking about how easy it is to identify, and sometimes, you know, it's seemingly on its face good, but, and it could be a religion, you know, that would be another, you know, I'm a Muslim, I'm Jewish, I'm Baptist, I'm Presbyterian, and all those things. There's nothing wrong with really any of those things, as long as you don't relinquish your own self-identity, which is basically knowing at every moment that you are consciousness. You know, we all are simply manifestation, temporary, very temporary manifestations that take form of God consciousness. And everything is a very temporary manifestation of that consciousness. But it's important to hang on to always be centered in knowing that that is what you are in essence. When you strip away everything else, including things like, you know, I'm a mother, that's important to me, and that's a good thing. But when you strip away everything, including your sex, you know, boy or girl, you are consciousness, and you just have this temporary form manifestation. And it serves a very useful purpose, because we all incarnate with different gifts. And if we really use those gifts to the best of our advantage, then we promote the overall arching goal of the universe, which is to spread divine consciousness. So while we're here incarnated in form, we have these gifts that we can share. So I just thought this lecture really was, because there were a lot of examples in it, which I found very useful and interesting, of how we can slip off that pin of always remembering the essence of who we are by identifying with something other than that.
Yeah, that's very valuable. I'm thinking that in our independence, you see, the guy often always says, the strongest groups are made up of independent individuals.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, if you want a strong group, you have to have independent individuals who can stand on their own, and then they come together and form a powerful group.
Exactly.
So, you know, maybe it's through, you know, it's almost, you know, one can feel like the Pathwork doctrine is a little bit austere, in that it said basically that, hey, you know, everything we experience is our responsibility. There are no victims.
Exactly.
So it seems a little cold, but on the other hand, if you take that as an invitation to be self-reliant, self-responsible, and strong in your own truth, then you can come together with other people and give to them and share with them. And then you can build a community, I think. Does that make sense? I mean, the guide always says we have a need to give, which is even stronger than the need to receive.
Yeah.
But you can only give effectively as an independent, strong individual.
Yes, exactly. And I think we see that in our own Pathwork group, because we're all individuals with our own ideas specifically about how things are presented, but together we share, and we've created something that's pretty magical.
Right. Very true.
Question for Tracy. You mentioned a lecture about self-reliance is essential for enlightenment. Do you know the number on that one?
No, but you know what? I'll find it. It's early. It's within the first 25. I will find it and send it to Alan, or I'll send it to this. I'll reply to all onto this group.
Thank you.
I will find it. I don't know it off the top of my head, but I can and will find it.
Thank you, Tracy.
All right. Who else wants to talk about this lecture? Stephen, how are you doing?
I just want to add also, you know, to
Juan.
what you, yeah. Hi everyone. This is Juan. Yes.
Go on.
Hello everybody. I just want to to add, hey, hello. I just want to add a little bit to what you said. Just finished saying, Alan. About how this sense of reliance, is necessary to really be a key member to a group. And my thought was right away how that applies also to relationship. And I think the guy briefly touches base on this, that the maturely emotional person, will have not that need to be loved because he have that love in himself. So if we have that love and reliance on ourselves, it's so much easier to establish a strong and well-connected relationship. Because when we have this need to this dependency, like we want to, instead of connecting to our own self, we sort of want to use that other person in the relationship to connect to basically create that dependence that needs to be for ourselves rather than anything outside of ourselves. It's really that was a thought that crossed my mind when you were talking about that, and how I think I have my own, in my own life experienced that kind of feeling, perhaps in me to some degree, but also in the other partner. That's what caused me to think about that. But truly, there is so much, I think, in this lecture, and I really thank you, Tracy, for picking it. I mean, all the guys' lectures are like, monumental. I mean, like you finish reading one and you think that was the best one, and then you read the next and you realize that no, that was the best one. This is actually the best one. But anyway, to me, I mean, personally, there is so much resonance here, in this lecture. So many things, so many points that just like went right, to me, just like boom, just like arrow, and of course, I don't know if it happens to you guys, but when I read a lecture, some things don't quite like make any touch anything really, or I have any feeling or any identification with. But there's all of a sudden, something I read and I'm like, oh, okay. And then that's how I sense that there is something in me that I need to work with, pertaining to what I am reading. So in this one particular lecture, you briefly touched base on it, Alan, when you talk about death, and that was one of the things that really stood out to me, where the guy said, and this is page 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, kind of like the 7th paragraph here, when he says the crassest symptom is not feeling that your own death is a reality. And that's a line in the middle there. And to me, that was like, wow,
that's a big statement,
Yes, it
Big
is.
deal.
And
Yes.
mm-hmm.
Because I know the Catholic doctrine also encourages people to think about their own mortality, but I think in a kind of a different way. But I'm sitting here with my mother, to bring her up again, and she's 99. She's not going to be around for. So, like, how does that lead to my own sense of my own mortality? When I feel comfortable with my mortality right now, I feel I'm ready to rock. But it is a stunning sort of paragraph where he says that. And you have to meditate on what that means, a sense of your own mortality. So I think what the lecture is saying is that the less you identify with yourself in this healthy way, the less you are in reality. In other words, you identify with other people, with your spouse, with your parents, with a cause, politics, religion, and the less you're able to give to others, because the less full of your own reality you are, I think.
Yeah. What touched me there quickly, I try to be as brief as possible now, because I think I talked enough, but to me, it was like, I thought all along that I was okay with that. And, and I was like, okay, I know, and I believe in reincarnation. And, I have been, pretty much a spiritual person all my life. And I grew up as a Catholic and all that. And I believe, of course, in Jesus, who teaches, eternal life and all that. But when I read that, it was like, then I realized that I was not quite in touch with my own mortality. There was some, and that what really cleared that up for me was the last line of the paragraph, when he says, for if you do not feel your mortality as real, you cannot possibly feel your aliveness as real. And I was like, oh, wow, okay, And so that really got to me, and made me realize, like, okay, I think I really need to just to finish the story of my part of it, is that I really think that I need to work more on on accepting more my own mortality, and really kind of like go deeper into myself and find where in my personality do I actually fear still not dying really, or departing from this physical body, because I don't feel that I am as alive as I can be. That was just my point.
Well, it
Thank
does
you all.
seem to me that, for me anyway, the key to thinking about mortality is the fact that it's not the end of everything, not the end of existence, but instead it's a transition. What do you think, Stephen?
Just going back a few steps to the word independent. For me, that's a double-edged sword, really. It reminds me of a play I saw many, many years ago where the lead role said, "I'm so independent, I'm lonely." And I find independence is not necessarily truly independence. It might really be dependence. And in my own case, I've been severely independent, probably because I was afraid of ever being dependent. So it's really a double-edged sword, and that word I find somewhat confusing. It's nice to be independent, but in let's say a healthy way. Being independent could also turn on one. So that's just really my point. I don't know where to go with that. It's just that the fact that I remember this play maybe 30 years ago, that one line where he said, "I'm so independent, I'm lonely." The bell went off in my head.
Mm.
And at that point I said, "Really?" And I said, "Gee, I'm lonely. And but I'm independent." Well, I wasn't quite sure then I was so independent. But anyway, that was my point.
I think sometimes when you think about independence, I think of the unhealthy dependencies that I identify with as not being independent. In other words, somehow I feel that independence is something that is, you don't know where it's going, if this makes sense. In other words, Tracy, what do you think? In other words, what I'm trying to say is that a feeling of independence means you are ready, you're open to guidance as to where you're going to go, who you're going to relate to, where you're going to give. You're open to a new direction. If you're not independent in that way, then you're dependent on something. Does that make sense? Nancy, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. That's a good point, that if you can't let go, you're dependent upon the thing you can't let go of. And I really liked what Tracy said about you have to be strong and know who you are. You have a strong sense of self, but that self also has to include the awareness that you're part of God's consciousness. So you've got the, I can do this, but you're also in the receptive mode. You're in the giving and the receptive mode.
That is a very deep insight. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point, Nancy, because we really sort of almost need to be vessels where things can come through us.
Right.
Right. That is what you get when you're able to be independent, right?
Yeah. Also, I think
Right.
that if I remember, I'm really starting to want to search for this lecture right now. I don't think the guide used the word independent. I think it was self-responsibility. And being self-responsible is not the same thing as being independent. There's a very distinct difference between those two.
Yeah, I was having, Kay here, I was having a problem with the word independent as we were talking. It didn't sit right with me. Certainly I want to be in touch with my real nature, or who I really am, or what I really am, I should say. So, and yeah, being independent, I don't want to be independent. I've been independent my whole life, like you, Stephen.
Right.
I was very independent, and I didn't want any dependency. I was probably scared to death of it, but I certainly identify with what you said, Nancy, because when you become more, I don't know, more comfortable with yourself, and that has to do with spirituality for me, more comfortable with who I am as a spiritual person, then I become more open to receive, or to even ask for help, or to ask for advice, or to receive when I pay attention to what's going on out there, not because I'm wondering what they're thinking of me. Thank God I've gotten a little bit away from that, but wondering what is out there that I should be paying attention to. You know, maybe it's a pattern, maybe something is arising that's trying to tell me something. And I think that's part of being more comfortable with yourself, that you can look outside at the world and sort of say, what's happening? You know, I'm okay here. Let me see what's happening, you know. And so I was really going to ask the question of Alan, but I think I answered it for myself, what it feels like to know, or to feel, to be your true self, or who you are. It's not something you can put a picture on. You can't draw it. But anyway, I think I've got it. It was a great lecture. Thank you, Tracy, for describing it further. It was a terrific choice.
So is that the process you think of identifying with yourself, as opposed to identifying with parents or other people or cause?
Sure, you have to work through psychological stuff, you know, I identify with the parent that didn't like me, and I didn't want to be anything like her. But of course I was acting out as her. So, but for me, I think it's spirituality. I will say this as if I know, I don't know, but it just seems to me you can't do it without knowing that you're connected to something larger than yourself. And that, even if as I speak it, that gives me a solid feeling of being here, right now. But I'm not alone, because I'm connected.
As somebody once said to me, we do it in a group by ourselves.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah,
But
that's nice, Stephen. Thank you. Yeah, because what keeps running through my mind is the issue of the interconnected web, you know, that we are connected with everyone, and we can't just act out of self-interest. And the words independent, you know, can be misconstrued to that's an interesting slip. Misconstrued. Misconstrued to be the rugged individualism that Americans are so fond of and so caught up in, and caring, I can do what I want when I want to do it. And that's missing out on the consciousness, the expansion of consciousness. I'm not being very articulate.
we know what you mean.
Thank you, Alan.
But that also, I think what that is the guy would call an image of independence. It isn't true independence. an image which is a misconception about independence.
Mhm.
You know, that you have to be isolated and not need, you know, you don't have any needs, or, you know, you're totally self-contained or whatever. But I think it usually also masks a refusal to admit or acknowledge certain aspects of yourself. You know, that kind of American toughness. It's putting up barriers, but not only to the outside, but also to the inside, to the inner exploration, I think.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
So just to make a couple comments. I thought it was very interesting that the first point that the guide made about how to live in reality was to recognize our mortality. And I also thought it was very interesting that that was it. It was that one paragraph, but there wasn't anything discussed about how to practice this, how to bring it into reality. So that's just sort of hanging there, right? I remember once I saw a program about some Greek Orthodox monks, and they were living on this remote island. I believe they were the only ones on the island, and they were being interviewed. I think it was like 60 minutes, and they were going over what did they do each day. And one of the things that they did each day was that they went and visited all of the skulls of all of the monks who had lived there before and who had passed away, in order to stay in touch with their mortality. And I recall that there's a similar practice amongst the Buddhist monks that are living up in the mountains. And I just, it was so dramatic, you know, seeing this huge pile of skulls. And this was, I guess, long before it was just startling to me, you know, to think that they were spending time this way. And so I think that's a good question, right? Is what do we believe about death? Where did those beliefs come from? And how do they help to support our living in the truth and connected to the infinite, right? I mean, you know, one of the things that I love about Jesus is that he said, I give you a life everlasting. And to me, that was the message of Easter, not anything else that stayed predominant for me. And so here's this man who, however you think of him, whether you think of him as a god, or you think of him as a God man, or you just think of him as a messenger, a holy person who says to us, I give you life everlasting. And then this is a theme in all of the major religions, right? In Hinduism, we have reincarnation. In Buddhism, we have reincarnation. And so what is it? What does that look like, right? What happens to us when we die? And so I think this is very determinative of how we live, right? If I just think that I only have this life, then, and which I think a lot of people unfortunately think that, and then that there is no consequence to what we do, our actions. Oh, Alan, I like your necklace. Give it to me. I'm taking it, because this is all there is. There isn't any hereafter where there might be a consequence, right? So I you know, the lecture has a lot of different parts, right? And how to live in the present, and then going into these things about our parents and how we identified with them, and how we identify with different groups and causes. And so for me, I think it's a process, right? This continual process of looking to see, what are the images, you know, how am I living on automatic and not really in the moment, not thinking about things, not taking responsibility,
Well, you
and
look,
just continually letting it unfold, right? But making a point to spend, I'm trying to take time to just notice how I'm feeling, right?
Right.
In the course of the day. Am I in a peaceful, am I having a peaceful experience of the day? Am I agitated? What's causing me to separate from the peace? And just kind of, and what supports that peace? What are the different elements that help me to stay connected to a positive experience of myself in my life? Because I think that's the way we're meant to live, and that the guide's trying to lead us to.
Right. Well, of course, you have to go through the negative stuff as the guide.
Yeah.
In most of the other lectures, not this one so much, but well, actually, the guide does kind of mention also in this lecture the absolute imperative nature of uncovering the hidden negativity. And of course, the guide does talk unequivocally and straightforwardly about death, what it is, what happens. You know, the guide is pretty straight up about what happens when you die and reincarnation and how you prepare for the next life. But that's, of course, something that's intellectual, right? It's hard to feel the reality of that sometimes emotionally.
I had a thought, something that came up while Joel was speaking, and it had to do with near-death experience. Like when you have a near-death experience, you know your own mortality, and I've never been more in the now than after having a near-death experience. Obviously, I don't want to run out and create that, but it just kind of brought that point home to me about what does it mean to really know your own mortality. The only other time I've come close to that feeling is when I took like a gigantic leap of faith. So I took some kind of risk that I felt like I was being called to do. That was another time that really brought me into being very present, because I felt like the things that keep us secure and tied to this life were not necessarily there, like my safety nets were gone or whatever.
Right.
So what I'm taking from that is to take more risk, maybe emotionally or with vulnerability or whatever that looks like different ways we can take risk could be a way to experience our immortality in a way that does bring us present. Just my random thoughts.
I think it's
Yeah.
also, I'm sorry, go ahead, Pete. Steve?
You know what, it
Oh,
occurs to me,
okay.
Alan, is how we're experiencing our own death all the time when we explore our images and we become responsible for our own negative behavior and speech and thoughts and feelings, and we try to become something more, right? We try to really become more real and more truthful. We are experiencing this death on an ongoing basis, and yet we cling to our old ways because they're so familiar, right? And the seemingly secure, but that's not where the security lies, right? It's when we release it, when we face the pain of of our limitations and try to be something more. But then, so we are dying in a sense, but we're also being born to who we really are. And
Sure, this isn't the correct quote, but the whole thing about the coward dies 1,000 deaths and the brave man only dies once. But I think that's an idealization of being alive. It's also valuable, I think. I was talking to some folks who were in the presence of people who died, and they said they felt a liberation, a feeling of light when they passed over, transitioned to a different state. And that also maybe is instructive too. Well, what do you, I mean, I wonder how hospice workers feel when they're in the presence of people who die. That's just a thought.
Well, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote a lot about that, how right before death, people suddenly smiled, became enlightened, and relaxed,
Mm.
completely at peace. And I forgot who it was. Maybe it was Steve Jobs or something. And right before he died, he woke up, stood up in his bed practically, and said, "It's beautiful on that side, truly
Mm.
beautiful," and then died.
Mm.
Worked in hospice for a year, but I really didn't do a lot, but I did. I was around people who were dying, and then I was around dead bodies. And I just want to mention that Zen, which is something I also study, has practices on death where the monks go to the cemetery and sit there at night. They spend the night in the cemetery. But that was sort of what I felt when I was doing hospice. Because when do you ever have an opportunity to actually take a dead body with somebody else was with me and put it in a bag? And you know you have to do it in order to have the response is amazing. The realization of who we're not, that we're not the body.
Mm.
So I do think it's important to actually figure out some little ways to get connected to people in some way closer with death. And I wanted to mention, Darlene, I see your name is Darlene. Is it Darlene?
Darlene.
Darlene, I think I've met you once before. But Darlene, I completely agree with you in terms of taking risk. Even for me to join, to volunteer to be a hospice worker, it takes risk. And there's all kinds of things in your life that you can say, I'm not going to do that. It's too scary. And I think it's important in terms of spirituality and certainly the guide's words that we step up to the plate sometimes and test ourselves out a little bit and see what's really happening. So I admire you for and I encourage you in that way.
Taria, I was wondering what you were thinking.
Let me see if I can. Okay. I'm listening to all of this, and I mean, I have recently gone through a lot of death. My sister-in-law, Frank, and so on. And I don't know, I feel that I have lost the fear of death.
Mm.
Just by I guess going through the feelings that I had. And I have come out now with this belief that we are living this life right now. So I'm trying to live the best I can. And I was living it before, just like I think Stephen was talking about it. I thought growing with the family I had decided to become independent. And I lived my life like that. And then I realized that at that point, I had also shut off my feelings. So I was not independent at all, But that took me a long time to work on those little by little, because then all the fears and all the other stuff came out. And I think that somehow my outlook in life generally has changed to the better. I'm glad to say at this point, because being that I'm getting older too, who knows when the death is coming. Hopefully not too soon, but of course it's a possibility always. It's very interesting to listen to everybody's feelings especially about these kind of things, because it gives me something else to think about. Right now, I'm actually babysitting 2 of my grandkids, so that's why I'm off a little bit, because so far they have been pretty quiet, but just in case I go off again. Has been very helpful, and I appreciate everything that people have said. Thank you.
Thanks.
How old are they?
8 and 10.
Teresa, what are your thoughts?
Hi, Alan. Well, it's a very deep lecture. Unfortunately, I was super busy at work. I didn't have a chance to read it. So I'm following along with you guys. But I think that the fear of death can be combated many ways. For me, I read the book Journey of Souls, and it's a similar concept to what Brian Weiss discovered with past life regression, but this book talks about in-between life. And so he was an atheist and he was hypnotizing people, you know, to bring them back to their childhood, just to heal certain things. And somehow he got them with the command he gave to in-between lives. And literally, you know, these are people sitting in his room, but of course, this is their super conscious mind remembering everything. So they describe the moment of their death, the passing, and then what happens on the other side in vivid detail. And there's a lot of different cases. And so he says, you know, from like souls who are fairly young, who incarnate here early, and the whole families come out and they have a group of 5 people that wait for them and they find their group, to people who are highly advanced, like level 5 people, who basically just have their guide. But what I got from this book was that there is so much love on the other side. We're never alone. There's always somebody waiting to intercept. And even at the moment of death, he kind of sort of, sorry, somebody's trying to call. Even at the moment of death, somebody is basically there, you know, intercepting and loving and guiding us. And even if they come from different realms. So it looks to me like it's a very real thing. But since I read that book, my fear of death is not so strong, because I just got to feel like we are loved, we are cared for on this side, and maybe even more so on the other side. And I think it's probably a little easier on the other side, except we have to examine our life over and over again to see the mistakes and to learn from them. But I think, you know, it's a lot of love on the other side, and we definitely never alone. And recently a friend was passing of a friend, and they were there by her bed, like a night before she died, or on the same day, a few hours early. And she says, oh, they are all in here. They are all in here. And I completely understood that from that book, that people, they start coming into the astral, you know, they one leg here, one leg there, and they see already the greeting party on the other side. And her husband was like, yeah, we are all here. We're all in here. And she didn't think she was talking about that. And I was sure that she was talking about the astral greeting, you know, they were getting on the other side. So somehow that book really calmed my fear of death to a large degree.
That's good. Yeah, my mother kept talking. She had a very good friend of hers who was about the same age, 99, Adele, who they were school children, chums together back in 2nd grade back in Hungary. And she always said that, you know, Adele said, look, whoever gets to the ferryman first, wait until you get into the boat for me. And let's cross that boat together, you know, that boat that leads you across the river Styx. So she was looking forward to, her friend is waiting for her. Yeah, of course, the guide says that spiritual progress is a lot easier here on earth. That's why we're here. It's hard to make spiritual progress in the spirit world because they don't have the limitations that we do. And by coming up against our limitations, that's where we can exercise our spiritual strength and our spiritual muscles and strengthen them. Well, any other thoughts about this lecture, friends? Anyone want to share?
One good point that I found here was, you know, this fact of the time, and then this subject that the guy goes over and over again, this subject of self-identification. And you know, to me, this is the really at the end of this, you know, at the end, the very end of everything. This is really the aim. And I think the guy in this lecture, he gives it that name, but in many other lectures, he uses different names for it, but I think it comes down to the fact of just connecting with our inner self, connecting with our higher being, our higher self that is within us. And you know, as some of you were mentioning earlier, it has to do with really experiencing and going through all, you know, the blockages and, you know, misconceptions and images and wrong conclusions and all this material that is hidden, you know, that constitute, for what I understand, the lower self, and is impeding us from connecting and really centering our true self. One of the things that stuck with me was that, you know, on page 5, that's 1, 2, and the third paragraph there, how the guy talks about, you know, how can one even identify with a good cause? You can be even all these goods and, you know, doing all these good deeds and serving maybe nonprofit organizations or whatever, but that can also be a substitute for identifying with yourself, you know, for really, just basically, I think the guy is saying that, you know, we are too afraid, very, very afraid to connect with our inner self, because that's our true self. That then we're afraid, I guess, well, we will find out if we truly connect with our inner self. So in order to avoid that, we find every, you know, excuse that we can find, you know, joining religion, joining group or political groups, joining you know, good causes organizations, and anything that we can find, of course, through the ego self, through the ego, we do all this, but any cause that we can find to escape from facing that inner reality. So to me, that was a very interesting point, and I think I'd like to share the whole paragraph with you guys very quickly.
Sure, yeah, read it.
Is that good? Okay. He says, people may also identify with causes, no matter how good the cause itself may be, if it serves as a substitute for self-identification, there is harm. The harm is not in your embracing this worthy cause, believing in it and working for it. All this could be very well be done with inner freedom, but in your need to substitute something other than yourself to lean on, because you have not found where within yourself you are still a weak child. As long as you have not understood your hidden motivations for embracing the cause, you are still compelled to identify with an outer, authority. So, you know, that's, to me, that just resonated.
Yeah, that sounds
Yeah, just wanted to share that, yeah.
There's a wonderful lecture at 194, Identification and Intentionality, Identification with the Spiritual Self to Overcome Negative Intentionality. That was actually the first lecture I actually went to, that was delivered by Eva.
194.
194.
Mm-hmm.
And it was amazing, the energy in that room. Amazing.
Wow.
After the lecture. Matter of fact, the energy was so strong in the room that there's even a note at the end of the lecture talking about it. But that's really, like you said, Juan, that's the whole thing, identifying with the spiritual self, with the true self.
Mm-hmm.
That's the objective of everything that we're doing.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Juan or Alan,
Oh, yes.
Tracy, why do what's the fear of becoming in touch with the real self? Is that the annihilation of the ego?
Like
Well,
to
I think
answer that?
that is certainly one of the aspects, right? I mean, the ego is very afraid of being overwhelmed, of losing control. But I think it's also negative intentionality. I mean, I think that there's an anger and a rage that that's inside that does not want to give up negative patterns. There's a withholding quality. There's an anger that exists, that we're embarrassed of, that we're ashamed of, that we don't want to contact, I think. We talked about shame of the higher self our last discussion. that's relevant to it also.
Okay.
Yeah, I think also, yes, as you said, Alan, I think of course the ego is very, very much involved in in this. And I think it's perhaps, as I understand, different aspects here, because I also think in my case anyway, I feel or sense that once you become identify with that higher self, this is an incredible, enormous power. We are fearful. I mean, fear is standing in the way. We kind of unconscious don't know what we do with this immense power. And I think in a sense, we also fear the responsibility that will come, from connecting to this supreme power, this, enormous power. Because obviously, the more is given, the more it will be asked of you, as it is said in the Bible. So when we have control or connection, or total connection with the supreme power, we will have an enormous power at our disposal. So we have to really, I think we fear that connection, and I think that is one of the reasons also.
Sure, it's the Marianne Williams quote.
Yeah. I've been puzzling about that quote a lot. This discussion helps. What did you want to say about it, Alan?
Well,
I don't know what I don't know what the quote is. I don't know what you're talking about.
Ah.
Sorry.
Well, I mean, maybe I can find it and not paraphrase it, but it has to do with the fact that we're afraid of our great potential and our power more than we're afraid of pettiness or negativity
Or failing, or even
Yeah,
failing.
we're afraid of, in other words, and there's a quote on my mother's refrigerator from I don't know, Joseph Conrad. It's who has the fortitude to bear the burden, but who will have the courage to cast it off.
Right. That's powerful.
Alan, I think it was Nelson Mandela said, we are more frightened of our joy than our pain.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the power, the word power, it really resonates with me. I hear you saying that we will have to accept the responsibility for the power we have, not only for what we're doing in the world, which we're all being aware. Okay, this is my choice now. That I think we get that. It comes back to us, and it's my responsibility. But for the power to be mine, and that to be my responsibility, that's scary. That's where my fear is.
Yeah. I also think that the fear of losing the ego's approval is huge. You can't go back into, if you're this powerful being, it's so diametrically opposed to living under the ego's rules. And the fear of losing the ego is just
right. Daunting. And I think, as the guide would say, that many people struggle with that for lifetime upon lifetime before they can give it up. Right?
Well, that's encouraging.
I would find that discouraging.
Well, it's gratifying in the moment if I can't give it up.
One of my favorite quotes is that the guide says, meditate on the length of this path. I mean, the guide literally talks about thousands of incarnations.
Meditate on the length of this path.
Yeah.
Do I have it right?
Meditate on the, I think that's it. Or did I say that?
Makes sense.
Yes, you did. That's close enough.
On the length. And then here, I found the Marianne Williamson quote. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us.
Yeah.
Very much so.
And I found that, I'm not sure where I got this quote from. I think it's from Episcopalian priest, female priest, about, I bless you, I release you. I set you free, I set me free. I let you be, I let me be. And I say that to my long gone parents a lot. And I think that really helps me break. It liberates me and it liberates them. And I can just go live my life.
It is beautiful to live without the ego.
Excuse me?
It's beautiful to live without the ego.
Mhm.
Ego is not your friend.
That's right.
We go to the ego as if we're going to get help. The ego is out to get us. It's not my friend anyway.
Well,
I
I think it's good to be cautious with that also, because as the guide also teaches us, the ego is a necessary tool to connect with the higher self. It's just how it is used,
Right.
So the unhealthy ego, yes, that's your enemy, your little ego, that's just your worst enemy. But, this same guy needs to be, made healthy, basically, so that it can be used as the instrument to connect with that higher self within. Without it, we cannot do it, It's kind of flipping side to it, really. So interesting.
Mhm.
Isn't there a place that says the only way to transcend the ego is through the ego?
Right. You need a well-functioning ego to transcend the ego.
Yeah, you need it, yeah.
Need a well-functioning ego to transcend it. Yes.
But I think there's a difference between these ideas of the ego, what the guide calls the little ego versus the healthy ego. I think there's a couple of wrinkles about the word ego.
Mm.
On one level, the ego is the executive function that helps us operate in the world, helps us focus on our job and business and earning a living and getting the food on the table and things, practical details. On the other level, the ego is that entity within us, that part that is resistant to the higher self, that does not want to surrender to spiritual intuition, and that enables the lower self.
Right.
The ego is also associated with the mask self. Right? The ego is defensive, is its basic stance.
Marion,
Ego as a tool, as a useful tool, but not as an element that's running your life, but as a useful tool. I can certainly see it. Yes.
Yeah, Marion always uses this very cute example. She said, the ego is our foot soldier. So our higher self can make us have the inspiration to go to church, but the ego is the one who's going to get us out of bed, get in the shower, get dressed, and drive us there.
Mm-hmm.
Tool. It's a good tool.
It's kind of like anything else, right? That we have these splits, and what we're trying to do is bring it all back together.
Right.
So an aligned ego is, it's our friend. At least that's how I see it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I think also, if we're talking about merging with the infinite and just becoming our God self, there's the element of grace.
Right, and grace is foreign to the ego. I don't think the ego and grace have any intersection. Yeah, the ego doesn't believe it needs grace.
What did you say, Alan?
I said it doesn't. The ego and the grace are foreign to one another, it seems.
Ego and the what?
Grace.
Grace. Okay.
Explicit.
The ego connects with grace at all. I think it's non-existent to the
grace.
Yeah, grace. Grace.
I hear you saying race. RACE.
Eckhart Tolle talks about, he doesn't talk about the ego very much, but he speaks about the pain body. And I wonder if that's synonymous with the ego. And pain body is something within us that likes to get angry and likes to eat a lot of pain and anger. And the less we feed it with anger, the smaller it gets. But it tends to erupt at inopportune times. I don't know how that relates to the ego, but I see that in myself, actually. And I can identify when I'm in the pain body. And it's very helpful because I can stand back as a witness and actually see myself or the part of me that is involved with the pain body, and the part of me that stands behind it all as the witness. And as the witness, it says, oh, Stephen's in the pain body. And that has helped me a lot, actually, to just be with it and to experience the pain that I experience without inflicting it on somebody else and making the situation much worse.
Amen. Mhm.
Very important.
So would anyone else like to share about this topic, or shall we have a meditation and send some love and healing to Marion?
Right?
Mhm.
Well, like I said, I feel quite close to her. I've known her for a long time. She is a woman who is courageous, is a spiritual seeker. She's unabashed about being a spiritual seeker, and she's courageous in the way she confronts her own lower self and in the way she shows up. And I have been sharing the messages that I've gotten from her family. She's got 2 kids, Andrea and David. And David flew in from Columbus. Andrea's here in New York. And apparently, David came there and shared chanting with her, I think, the name of her spiritual guru, Meher Baba, who she often refers to. I believe she's following a path with Meher Baba, and also, of course, the Pathwork. And she had the ventilator removed. She had the breathing tube removed, and I think she's making a good recovery. I think that Andrea said something about that. David was tapping on her. There's something called EFT tapping, but he was doing it wrong. So she got irritated and told him that he wasn't doing it right. Something like that. But, Marion is feisty, and I just love the way that she gives her presence. I know that you guys have seen that in our discussions. So let's join together for a few minutes.
And I just want to
Go ahead.
mention something. I
Yeah.
sent a card. If
Mhm.
anybody wants to have her know her room number or to send her a card, she's in room 400.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
That's at NYU
At
Presbyterian.
which hospital?
she's at Presbyterian, New York Presbyterian. And no, it's not NYU. It's 525 East 68th Street. 525 East 68th, room 400, eighth floor south. The guy was very specific, 8th floor south. And that's New York. Oh, I don't have the zip code. I took the zip code off the internet, but you can get that zip code from the internet.
Okay, thank you, Kay.
All right, so let's take 5 minutes and center our healing energy, our prayers and our blessings and our thanks for Marion, the way she manifests in this life and the great gift that she gives to us and many other people too. All right, so let's focus on Marion for 5 minutes, all right? I'll set the timer. Okay, that's 5 minutes. Everyone can unmute themselves if they like. Marion, thank you for showing up in this Pathwork. And thank you for being part of my life in this incarnation.
Before we know it, she'll be back with us. We'll do a blink of an eye and she'll be with us on a Friday night. And I'll be very happy.
That's what I was envisioning, you know, having her at the Pathwork meeting again, having her contribute, sharing a snack afterwards. And I saw that she had a little limp on her left leg, I believe. But she was fine and spirited as always.
Yeah, I love her feisty energy. And, you know, they say in the Pathwork, you know, that groups of souls kind of come back and forth and meet each other in different combinations in different incarnations. So, you know, I think we're all part of a family that goes through all kinds of fascinating journeys that we probably don't remember when we're here on Earth, but God willing, we'll remember when we make that transition.
I like what you said, Alan. I feel less lonely now.
Sounds good, Steve. Yeah. I really feel that the energy of this Pathwork group is very healing. And I think about this group sometimes, and it always peps me up, makes me feel good, strong, and more relaxed.
I personally feel good to connect with you guys because the truth is that it's difficult to find, you know, people who align, you know, who are aligned with this way of thinking. You know, if you go out there and even to some of your personal friends, you know, that are not so spiritual, you to talk about, you know, some of the material that we find in these lectures, you know, they will very likely think that you are, you know, cuckoo, that something's not quite together with you. You know, so I am grateful that, you know, we can connect in this way and that, you know, we can share this very, very deep material that to me has an incredible importance. And to me, this is the significance of life. I mean, to me, just so much. And it gives so much meaning to my own existence. Every time you open one of these lectures and I go through it and read it, and when I get to come, you know, to discuss it with you guys, it's very, very enlivening because I know that you don't think that I'm crazy when we talk about this material. So it's good to be a part of this great.
Thing that's
Thank you.
very nice is when you go on Amazon on the Pathwork books, you'll see a lot of comments about people who have read the books. And these are people that are not really connected to the Pathwork organization, but they've read the books and they've taken them to heart and it's helped them in their journey. And I think when you read those comments that people have on the books, it's really a wonderful thing that there's people all over the world that kind of found a book, you know, in a library or in a used book sale and just picked it up. I think that A Course in Miracles is like that too, I think. And people just kind of pick it up and it does something, transforms something about their life.
Oh, it does. It does. This, I mean, I have a book also that is, it's called God Calling. You know, it's very, very similar to you know, to this, you know, to the material you just, you know, that we described, the Course of Miracle, and it's very, very interesting. You know, how this is so Jesus talking to these two ladies. He supposedly came every day to these two ladies in England. And he spoke to them, and they wrote down, you know, what he told them. And it's a very, very fascinating book. And it's so ironic that when, you know, when Barnes and Noble was around, I just went there, and all of a sudden this book was just sticking out like that. And I just saw it, I took it, and from that day, from that moment on, this book has been my life companion.
What's the name of it?
God Calling.
God calling.
God's calling, yes. I have
Okay,
right
we
here.
get it.
Very beautiful book.
Okay,
I read it
thanks.
every day.
Yeah, Teresa has it also,
Every
yeah.
day morning. It's a short paragraph straight from Jesus to the disciple, and it's very beautiful.
Yeah, it is, yeah. So it's a lot of good stuff out there. That one, I think, but it's just like, you know, that saying that goes, you know, when the pupil is ready, the teacher will appear. I think it's just a matter of, you know, preparing ourselves inwardly to receive this material. But all this great material is out there. The minute we are ready, I think we just automatically will attract it to us. Yeah.
All right, my friends. So if everyone feels comfortable, let's have our 10-minute meditation to close out our evening tonight. And let's meditate on what we've learned about self-identification and independence. Let's think about those two concepts and how we each can grow in what we identify with. And I identify that with the calling of listening to the spiritual self, listening to the deeper intuition about where we're guided to go next, without preconceptions, without relying on the ego to tell us where to go and what to do, and what to give to, and where to put our energy. All right, friends, let's again meditate for 10 minutes and bask in the good energy of our group and of our shared venture. The guide always says that we're kind of being cheered on by all these entities in the spirit world. You know, that it's not just ourselves that we nourish and we comfort, but it's so many other beings. And there's so many spirit entities that rejoice in our pathwork and what we're doing, and every little step of self-knowledge and self-recognition that we make. So let's remember that.